Another car related project. Whenever I do something interesting like this, I like to share it. Here's the manual for my big Roadmaster. I strongly suggest any of you guys that have one of these old cars and going to do work on it, hunt one of these up. I got this one off of eBay. This set cost me 80 bucks, and I tell you, it's been worth every penny of it. I have them for other cars, like there's a set over there for the that's the Chrysler 5th Avenue Diplomat from the late 70s to late 80s. Anyway, so my problem is with the passenger side front seat. It's got that fancy 3-motor, some people call it 5-way adjustment, and it won't go back and forth. In fact, it's jammed all the way up to the dash, which is kind of a pain. The wife is short. She can get in there on the rare occasion she actually rides with me in this car. So I still have to fix it, because one of my buds rides in there. I mean, one of them's, oh Lord, how tall is Rob? 6'7" or 8", and another friend's like 6'4". Yeah, I don't know how I come up with so many tall friends. So I looked in the manual, and I like to brief myself on what I'm getting into. Saves a whole lot of frustration, cussing, throwing things, taking the Lord's name in vain, that sort of stuff. So once I've got it all like in my head and what's where and what process you need to take it apart, then I'll go out to the car. Well, seat's gone. And boy, that was a pain in the butt. We'll get back on that in a second. So you see it has 4 bolts in the back, and that's for, crash prevention, to keep the seat from going this way, the crash. And 2 in the front, and a fat connector and a 6-pin connector in the center that you have to disconnect. It's pretty easy. On this one, it has sort of a button right here you push down and you can pull it apart. So then you have to wiggle it out and carry that probably 80+ pound seat in the house. So here we are in the house, and here's the seat, and it's flipped upside down, and yeah, boy, that thing was heavy. Back about taking it out, this is the back side here. Well, being as the seat was shoved all the way forward, getting to these bolts back here and taking this plastic cover off that screws in up over the bolts was easy peasy. But the front ones were a son of a gun. I mean, you know how we all get frustrated with, car engineers, and I use that term engineers loosely. They don't design anything to be actually repaired. So the way this thing is, if you have the seat all the way forward, you can easily get to the bolts in the back. And if you have it all the way back, you can easily get to the bolts in the front. And if you have it in the middle, all 4 of them are a bit of a pain. But if you have it like it's stuck here where somebody ran it all the way forward and then it failed, getting to the bolts in the front, which is right here, is just unbelievably cussing and throwing things frustrating. And the only way I was able to get to it, and I haven't had a set of these before, I've got a couple of big ones that I had to buy for a particular, and considering the number of tools I have, I'm not exactly sure why. And these are from Harbor Freight, and they're really nice. It's their new Pro line. And they're flex head ratchet wrenches, and they are very high quality. I was impressed. And so I was able to go down by the hump. Actually, the hump's on that side, but since I've got the camera in my left hand, had to go down by the hump, right up close to this, and get on here and do that number to get the bolts out. So these wrenches turned, fiddling it with a standard wrench, in like 1/16 at a time, it would have taken me good Lord, an hour or hour and a half standing on my head to take them out, maybe just take one out, with the conventional wrench, and there was just no way in that little bit of space right there that you're going to get anything but a wrench in there. And so these guys saved the day. I mean, the whole set wasn't but I think $25, and it's a set of 5. They go from 15 to 10, which is a really common range to, to have a access problem too. I'm gonna wait till they go on sale, and I'm gonna get the SAE set too. So, getting the seat out, having got the seat out, go on with the issues. These guys have got 3 motors. Let me reach over here and get the other motors. And this guy that goes right here and drives this gearbox here, and then through that cable drives this gearbox here, runs the rack back and forth on the ball slides here. This motor, which I've taken out of the way, has the ears broken off of it. So, like a lot of things on this car, a jack leg has been in here. I'm almost certain. And this motor, although it ran, it sort of flopped around the cables, and going down the road, you hear this tinka 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 tinka, and you wonder what the hell it is. And now I know. So it has these rubber mounts here, and actually it goes around this way, that it goes under, and it obviously, because you can't see it too well in here, and I have straightened it out somewhat. This bracket is bent. You can see that these steel cups, I'll show you those in a second, with the rubber bushings on it, and this one's torn, I just realized, aren't parallel anymore, because somebody's bent the crap out of this trying to get the motor off this stand. And watch the fat finger. So after fiddling with this one a while, it dawned on me that those things aren't going to come over. Those bushings with those steel thimbles inside of it aren't gonna pop over without some extraordinary amount of force, and I didn't want to break them. So I grabbed the drill, and these things are like that's that inside there. These things are actually riveted into this plate. So it's a funky shaped rivet. There's a rivet lip sticks up on this, goes in there, and they crimp it in. And these things go through like that. Focus. Go through like that. So I'll simply put them back in with some small short bolts. And I've got to come up with something for this one. I might exaggerate this bend and slip that motor in there, and then bend this back up so it's gripped fairly well between those two. And then, since there's a hole across in these things, I might put a strap across that, bolts through these holes and a strap on it, or just some rebar wire, and just put a wire X through these holes and pull up, twist it down, and I guarantee it won't ever move again. Now, you might hear it more when it runs, though, because it's not going to be sitting isolated on rubber bushings. But anyway, let's get on to the actual problem. So, using this motor here, which is the reverse jacks, which is this gearbox here and this gearbox over here, these guys have a square hole, like a speedometer cable, right through the center. In fact, that's what these are, if you recognize them. These are little short speedometer cables, exactly built the same way. Now, these two, since they're cables and they go all the way to the front and run the front jacks, actually those are the rear jacks, these are the front jacks, I got it backwards. The motor sits right between these, like this, thusly. But back here, the motor sits, and this one is the same way. This is the forward backwards movement here. The motor sits right next to this nipple that goes straight in the gearbox. And same here. The motor sits right next to this nipple that goes in the gearbox. There's actually no connector there, except on this one here. I found this guy. And it clipped behind this lip. I've turned all the lights on here in here, and I still don't have enough light. Wasn't the lights low? This thing doesn't want to focus. There he goes. So it clips behind this lip, which is the same sort of lip that these guys grip to. And that cable has a long end on it that stabs all the way through the motor, comes out the other side, and goes up into this little extension and engages this gearbox. Isn't that special? So what's happened on the fore-aft drive motor, which goes up here, is that cable has sheared off those little briars I pulled up, because I've got to clean up that end and pull all those ends up so I can get that cable out. Fortunately, the end that was stuck up in here came out rather easily. Here it is. Came out rather easily. That's where it's sheared off. You know, I don't know who the genius was that came up with speedometer cable drive, but they need to be whooped. Surely there was a slightly more expensive way, better way to do it. So I originally had thought of and was going to execute putting the motor back here, and square drive shaft into there, and using RC car drive shafts and universal joints for the larger ones, which would have been super strong, stronger than these things, and putting a square drive, taking a shaft and grinding a square, putting a UJ on it, and going right under this other motor, and another universal joint over here, and go into this, and sort of just jam them between it. There would be nowhere for the drive shaft to go. But it turns out I don't have to do that, because once I can get this cable out, I'll have plenty of that cable left over to carefully cut it off cleanly with an abrasive wheel on a Dremel, and then make up a little short piece of square shaft, which I don't know what I'll make that out of. I'll have to dig around in my junk. If I have to just grind it up by hand, that's fine. I can do that. Or maybe just cold hammer it. I don't know. And so I can, put the square shaft in there, put this motor on it, and then lock the other side of the cable into it, and that will be good. But one of the things I'll have to tweak up here, and I've already done it by pulling up on this whole bracket here is cantilevered off of this part right here that's riveted into the frame, and all of this part up here is floating. Now there's not much torque on it when it's operating, because this has a sheath that can take that guides the cable, so there's just a little bit of torque on it, not much. And but the ding dong that was in here before, and I kind of know where this car was worked on. Apparently went in the seat trying to fix it before and bent all of this stuff up. So in fact you can kind of see a bend there, and it's a little hard to see it in 3D, and this is sort of sagging down that way. So I've got to rework, and I'm going to try to do it without taking this motor off, because I don't really need to make more work than I need to. And straighten this bracket out so the motor that sits here is engaged properly, and we'll use this one without the cable, is engaged. Well, I can't even get it in there. This bracket is bent up, is sitting there on its mounts, and this side cup is over that, just like this one is. and straighten out this clip. It's bent a little bit, and put it on it. So I got that chore to do, and then make my drive shaft and put this thing together. So it looks like I'm going to be able to make this thing work, and I can only imagine that's the failure mode for a lot of these things. Yes, they do break these cables, and if you notice that nobody has stock for these cables, and the parts pickers know this, and when you can get one, this whole thing, I usually see them on eBay for like $100 or $80 or something like that, which is a little crazy. They probably get them from the, the picker place for that, for half that, and then they put them up on eBay. So if you're not lucky enough for your local picker, Pick and Pay or whatever it is, to have one, you're kind of hosed. Alright, so let me get on with that, and when I get closer to the testing, or get to the actual testing phase, I'll come back and video that. Okay, progress so far. As you can see, I have the cable out of the motor. And boy, that was tough. I scarred up that lock cup flange thingamadoodle that the cable hooks on, but this one isn't used anyway, just the one on this side. I took a small abrasive wheel on a Dremel, or Dremel as we say here, and went in tilted up at an angle in all directions, and nibbled away as much of that wire as I could. I tried straightening everything and then pulling it out, and that wasn't working. And I jammed it this way as far as I could and cut off as much as I could, and then went out and, well, you can see the scars, clamped this part in the vise, and tried pulling on the cable. I clamped this end of the cable in a pair of vice grips I had put in the vise, and tried anchoring it that way, and then pulling this off, and well, that was a no-go. I got it a little ways though. So I said, well, let me try some direct action. So by that time, the tip of this was almost flush, and there was the wires were bunched together, and there was still a hard core of wires that were twisted. So I took a roll pin punch, clamped this in the vise right here where I could get some meat on it and squeeze it, and slowly, carefully, lightly tapped this cable back out of there. Then I sized up how far it had to go about halfway, and trimmed it off on an abrasive wheel. And then I made my square drive shaft. Neato, huh? That started out in life as what we call, us old folks called, a cut nail. These predate the wire nails that we all see now, the common nails that are made on machines that are fed wire, and they basically cut a tip and then hammer on cold form on a head. These are actually cut out of a strip that's, well, in the case of this one, roughly this width and whatever that thickness is, because this end I didn't grind very much at all, because when I found this thing in the junk, the tip of it slipped up in this square drive a good little ways, and I went, yeah, hallelujah. So I clamped it in the vise. It took the grinder and made some light passes down it to get it square all the way down, because these guys are about twice as wide on this end as they are on this end, with a little bit of head. And normally when you drive them in, so, and you, depending on where you're driving, actually, you drive it in so that that wedge doesn't bust the end of the wood out. It is in crosswise. Now these things hold like the devil compared to modern nails, and they're hard. They're much harder than a common nail, and sometimes they're actually used and called these days concrete nails or masonry nails, because they were hard enough, and yes, they had a flat square tip, that you could drive them in brick block and joints of brick, and attach things, boards and trim, right to it that way. Pretty much these have been supplanted by modern, really very hard, almost brittle, round masonry nails. But anyway, that's our history lesson for today. So I ground this down into a square, and I have no worries about it being strong enough because, like I said, these things are pretty darn, have quite a bit of carbon in them. So the idea here is to go in there and meet this guy halfway, and this dude will go up in this gearbox side, however far it goes, and then I will hold the motor up here, look at it, and trim it off and make it the right length. I just left it as long as it was, which actually obviously is way too long. It only needs to come out about yay. So that's the next step. So I've got the cable parts sussed and got my shaft made, and I've got to cut that off and fit it up, and I still haven't straightened all this bracketry out. I've got to do that before I can assemble it. And when I get all that sorted, including finding some little nuts and bolts and putting the motor back on with these thimbles and figuring out how I'm going to deal with that motor, I think I've already outlined that. Put it on the bumps as best I can, and then strap it on with some wire or maybe zip ties, maybe both, before I put this thing back together, because getting to these motors without taking the seat out, well, after a few trials and tribulations, I got this thing back together. Had to do a lot of bending of this bracket to tip this motor down, because the bracket was shoved that way, and that actually put this motor, make sure you can see my finger, yes, that put the back of this motor too close to the floor. There is actually a hump right here. Yeah, I'm going to have to check that when I get in there. But according to the manual, which I was going to keep open and show you, but the camera tripod is sitting over top of it right now. Oh well. This motor is supposed to be pointed that way, and whatever dingling put this back together had it pointing this way. Why? Okay, I ran it up and down a few times testing it. The elevator motors were here and here were never really an issue, so that's good. And everything seemed to move okay. But I noticed that after a couple of times, this side got out of sync with this side. And so I said, okay, well, maybe it was because this one was broken, so I pulled the cable out and then plugged it over here and turned it and ran it all the way to the end. This one was all the way to the end. Hooked it back together, and did a couple of more, and I'd be damned if it didn't come out of sync again. It was like a quarter inch from not tracking each other. And the more I did it, the more this thing, didn't keep up. Oh, what the hell's going on? So I knew this side is driving because there's a square steel pin in here. And also I put the clip back on. I don't want to move the camera right now, but that clip I showed earlier is actually holding this end, which actually will pivot slightly down here up against the its mate, this gearbox that's right there. So I knew that side wasn't the problem, so I started investigating this side, and I noticed that this cable down here was going dead straight across. And this one here had a bit of a bow in it, and I went, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. So I took it back off again, and then realized that this end was not going all the way up in the socket solid, so the cable was straight. And pulling it out, I noticed that the end of the square had a burr raised on it. Where's my little metal square thing? So I tested the socket with this, and this little cutoff from the square drive I made, and it went right in there. So I turned this cable around, which this cable is much longer. It goes all the way to the center line of this motor right here. Than this side is. I turned it around, and that whole cable just went whoop right in the hole. So I went, okay, there's nothing wrong with the hole. There's nothing in there. And then I looked at the end of it and went, yep, sure enough, it's buggered up. So I had to take the Dremel motor tool and take the burrs off of it. Now I don't know how it got like that. It probably got like that from the dude that went in here and didn't know what he was doing and buggered all this stuff up, trying to fix something, I don't know what. But I think this slipping actually was what broke this over here eventually. I don't know what other issues it could have, unless this not going all the way up in here was an original GM assembly line, we smoked weed over lunch break kind of issue. So it's all working. I haven't not put my wire bridle over here to make up for the fact that the ears are broken. But I'm going to do that before I put this back in the car, because Lord have mercy, I don't want to go back under this thing. So I've got this bolted back on, and the screws are tight, and I'm going to run this back and forth for y'all. I think I'm going to leave it all the way back like it is, because it's easier to get in the car that way without these things sticking up here and having to squeeze by the door. And it's doing a little vibration thing. I just don't even care, you know. But they should stop almost simultaneously. Whoa, right there. So, yay. So we have a fixed, finally, seat after all of this garbage. And I can actually use the passenger side of my car for something other than a place to drop the shopping. So tomorrow, I've been working on this thing off and on all day, so tomorrow I am going to put this back in the car, and I'll have a little final clip with me sitting there running it back and forth with a big grin on my face, I hope, if I don't run into anything else. Okay, the ongoing saga of the broken seat. As you can see here in front of you, this floor pan is pregnant. I don't know what the heck that is, but even from the high angle, see, there's the front stud. But even sitting about 3 inches above the front stud, I could just barely see that far stud tip because of this hump in the floor. I don't know what that is, because I put my hand up under the car, and there is a cross member running right about here, and I put my hand up there and I feel, and the floor doesn't rise up like that. So I don't know what that is. I gave the book a look, and it wasn't like there was any hardware there, which kind of wouldn't make any sense to put it under the carpet. No one in their right mind would put any active electronics under a carpet, right? But my concern is, and you see it right here, the motor units under the seat have been pushing up on this. And I'm beginning to wonder if this flexing is not the cause of the original issues with the seat. Why that one, the driver's seat, that's moved a lot more, is fine, and this seat was broken. And this car, I know for the last, oh God knows, what, 15 years of its life, it was a one owner, one driver, one person car. When my in-laws had it, it was the mother's car, the mother-in-law's car, and whenever the two of them win anything, they win in his wagon, which was the same thing, a Roadmaster wagon, which is sitting over yonder, broken. So I'm going to poke around under this thing and see what the heck's going on. It feels, like I said, kind of soft, and I'm wondering if, you know, there's a dead squirrel under there or something. Or maybe, you know, the assembly line workers had to stash a bag, a dime bag under there or something other, but that's a lot for a dime. Okay, I'm going to go into it from the sill plate and have us poke around and see what's going on. Back in there, and yes, I did have to hammer down that hump a little bit. You can see, although the carpet is kind of poofed up still, but the motor pushes it down when it goes over it. Now, I don't know what the diddly-o is about that. See, it goes, it has that little kind of rumbly sound, which maybe I didn't get that square drive pin exactly straight, but it works. It goes back and forth. With me sitting in it, so it's roughly even with where I leave the other seat most of the time. The elevator works in both sides, so all is good. But back on having to smack that hump down. Yes, I did get my big rubber hammer, and I whacked that thing down probably almost an inch. I know I shouldn't have had to do that, and it looks like it may have been a real feature in the floor. And I looked under the other seat, the driver's seat over there, and see, it's flat, and both the motors are pointing forward. So I don't know what's going on here, that maybe there is a left and right hand version of that thing, and maybe I've got two rights because somebody tried to replace this thing. That's one possibility, perhaps. But I don't know, and it's in, and it works. So I'm gonna leave it. At some date I'm gonna come back and clean that carpet. I don't know when. But let's go take a quick look at the book. Okay, let's open the Holy Manual to Seats 10-10-22. And this is a 96 specific manual. And you'll see on this diagram is just like the late mechanisms, which are 95 and 96. I believe I have that correct. Where you have these motors that look like window motors, and a right angle drive in the gearbox. And in this same manual, if we flip back a few verses and look at this drawing, this is held over from the old seats that had the three motors that were side by side in a bracket. This goes back, I don't know, back from 74, 3, 2, 1. It might go back further than that. And in the front of this chapter, yes, these ghost drawings, you see, these are the same way. They show the lay-down motors, the motors that are coaxial. The drive shaft goes right through the center of the motor, and it has what do you call it? Planetary gear set. Yeah, and you also notice that there's not a right and left to this, because you can tell when the cables go in that these seat mechanisms are identical. I don't know if the later ones are identical. I don't know. I'm wondering maybe if they're not. But having this motor, well, these motors, having this motor turn around facing the other way actually puts it, see, this was tucked up a little higher than it looks. I'm wondering if this motor was turned around, pointing back this way, that when this is all the way back, that someone could actually get their foot on it and break it, I guess. So this is a puzzle, and I wish somebody in the comments would look under their car, under their seat, and tell me what the dealio is here. But you know, you work around, you make it work. Oh yeah, on this next page, here it is clearly the coaxial laydown motors of the previous generation. They just reused the same drawings. And this head-on gives you the same picture over here too. So anyway, that's the end of this little project. And I'm glad to be done with it. And boy, it was a tedious thing drawn out over a couple of days as I had ideas and workarounds and time to fiddle with it. But now it's back in the car, and the wife can get in the car now without banging her knees on the glove compartment door, despite the fact that she's short. So, hey, thanks for watching, and I hope if you're watching this, you get your seats working, because these things are just an annoying pain to work on. I mean, I think more so than other seats, electric seats that I've worked on. So, till something else breaks, bye.